Earth do dead video games, the future of AI, and, the fate of civilization itself have in common? Well, we're about to dive into this really fascinating essay that connects all of it through one powerful idea. And it all starts with a simple choice. Do we build or do we just destroy?
This right here, this is the quote from the author that unlocks everything we're going to talk about. It's such a simple but deep question, right? Is a society great because of what it creates and protects, or because of what it erases? Just keep that question in your back pocket.
All right, let's get right to the main idea. The author builds their whole case on this really cool framework they call terraform versus terraform. Think of this as the special pair of glasses we're going to use to look at everything, from our digital lives to the world right outside our window.
So what's the real difference here? Well, to terraform something is to build a world where things can actually grow. It's all about nurturing, supporting, tending a garden. But to terraform, well, that's the complete opposite. It's shaping a world through fear and control. It's about surveillance, exclusion, and just wiping out whatever came before. Two totally different playbooks for building any kind of world.
Okay, so let's put these glasses on and look at something most of us are familiar with: video games. The author makes a pretty bold claim that these aren't just toys, they're huge cultural spaces. So, what happens when someone decides to just bulldoze that space? To get a sense of just how big this is, look at this number. In 2024, there are 3.32 billion active gamers on the planet. I mean, that's way more than the audience for movies and music put together. These aren't just little niche communities anymore. They're like global digital nations with their own cultures and shared memories.
And that brings us to a huge, huge problem. See, unlike a book or a movie, these digital worlds can literally just be switched off, deleted, poof, gone forever. And when that happens, it's not just a piece of software that vanishes. A whole place disappears. A culture is lost. A community's shared history just evaporates.
And look, this is not a what-if scenario. It's happening right now. 2024 has seen this graveyard of games grow way too fast. Take The Crew, a game that 12 million people owned. Its servers didn't just get shut down. The publisher actually revoked the licenses, basically erasing it from existence. That is a perfect example of what the author calls digital terraforming.
The scale of this problem is, well, it's kind of staggering. An audit in 2024 found that a whopping 70% of online-only games are in danger of being lost forever. This isn't just about consumer rights. The author really frames this as a massive cultural emergency. We're losing our digital history.
So, okay, is that it? Is this just a one-way trip to the digital graveyard? The author says no, there's a way back. And it involves terraforming these worlds back to life using one of the most powerful tools we have right now, AI. And they lay out two really simple rules for how to do this. First rule, don't rip out the heart. You have to preserve the vibe, the feeling, the thing that made the game special to begin with. And second, use AI as a teammate, not a thief. Use it to support players, not replace them, to solve that big problem of empty worlds.
This quote really gets to the core of the whole vision for AI here. The idea isn't to just fill an empty world with a bunch of bots pretending to be people. No, the point is to use AI to solve the social problem. The empty lobbies, the endless matchmaking queues that make it impossible to play old multiplayer games. Just imagine it for a second. AI teammates that can actually help you finish that old raid that needs like 20 people. They could explain tricky mechanics, they won't rage quit on you, and suddenly decades of amazing, locked-away content becomes accessible to everybody again, even if you're just playing by yourself. Okay, now this is where the whole idea gets way bigger. The author argues that this terraform versus terraform lens, it isn't just for games. It's actually a super powerful way to look at our real-world institutions, starting with something like education. And the data on this is pretty wild. A 2024 study looked at what happens when you terraform education using game-like systems. The results? A 39% higher success rate compared to just your standard online course. The author's point is that it works because it encourages you to actually engage, not just passively click through. This framework even applies to something as serious as the justice system. The author contrasts two very different paths. The terraforming approach, correctional education, gives people a 43% lower chance of returning to prison according to a big RAND study. Now compare that to the terraforming approach of solitary confinement, which some studies have linked to rearrest rates as high as 92%. The takeaway is pretty stark. Building up a person's abilities works way better than just building a better cage. And now,
This is where the author takes their biggest, most ambitious jump. They zoom all the way out, connecting these ideas to a speculative, almost science fiction vision for where civilization itself could be headed. Seriously, stick with me on this one. Okay, so the author pulls together a few huge ideas that seem totally unrelated. First, a principle from 1961 that basically proved information isn't just abstract, it's a real, physical thing. Then, an idea from 1962 that hinted at a link between energy and gravity. And then, you jump to today, with tech like brain-computer interfaces, which are starting to blur the line between our thoughts and the digital world. So, what's the big deal? Well, the author speculates that if information is physical, and we're getting better and better at manipulating it with our minds, then maybe we're heading toward a future where we can shape our physical reality in ways we can't even begin to imagine. It's presented as the ultimate kind of terraforming, not just of a game, but of reality itself. And that brings us all the way back to the core question of the whole essay. As our technology gets more and more powerful, what are we using it for? Are we building better, more living worlds, or are we just building bigger, more sophisticated graveyards? According to the author, that choice is ours.
Welcome to the debate. Imagine someone logs onto a computer right now and types advanced weaponsmithing into a search bar.
Right, immediate red flags.
Exactly. In our current world, that search immediately triggers a cascade of binary reactions. A firewall blocks the site. An alert is sent to an administrator. The user is flagged, categorically banned from the network, and, perhaps even physically raided.
It's a system of total exclusion.
Yeah. We operate on a system that basically says the only way to manage danger is to shut it out completely. But what if, instead of slamming a door in that person's face, an artificial intelligence companion simply sat beside them in a digital space?
Just watch them learn?
Watch them learn, yeah, and continuously tracked their intent. Today, we are interrogating a really radical architectural vision for society, laid out by Zachary David Enfield. He focuses on the concepts of terraforming versus terrorforming. It is a massive structural provocation. Enfield is essentially asking us to abandon the concrete walls we've relied on for centuries.
Exactly. He divides our civilizational approach into these two methodologies. What we do now he calls terraforming, which is shaping the world through fear, strict boundaries, and rationed access.
And his alternative?
Right. What he proposes is terraforming. It's an architecture, an open reality architecture that relies on the convergence of AI within shared, interactive environments. He argues that dismantling these categorical prohibitions is the only way to foster a genuinely self-correcting civilization.
And that is the central question we're exploring today. Does the convergence of AI within shared substrates and, replacing these rigid prohibitions actually foster a healthy, cooperative society? Or does removing those systemic guardrails expose our infrastructure to just catastrophic vulnerabilities?
That's the crux of it.
I'll be defending the premise that open reality and AI convergence are the necessary terraforming steps we must take, because our current governance models of deprivation have totally failed.
And I will argue that this proposed architecture is structurally precarious, while his critique of the present is compelling. Enfield's cure is dangerously optimistic about both artificial and human nature.
Well, let's start with that critique of the present, because we have to establish why Enfield believes our current system is fundamentally broken. He looks at our institutions and sees what he calls rationed reality.
Governance by deprivation.
Right. And the data is just glaring. When you restrict a human being's access to culture, to education, to basic communication, you do not create a mature, reformed citizen. You just create a highly lucrative black market.
You are referring to the prison tablet data from the text?
I am, yeah. Enfield points out that incarcerated individuals are currently paying up to $300 in underground economies simply to jailbreak exploitative prison tablets.
$300 just to bypass the software.
Exactly. And why are they doing it? They aren't orchestrating massive crimes. They just want to send an email to their family without being charged exorbitant per-minute fees.
Right.
The wall between a person and that need, the restriction doesn't make the need evaporate.
It just monetizes the deprivation.
Yeah, I hear you.
True civilizational growth requires terraforming. We have to stop relying on surveillance and punishment and utilize AI as supportive teammates to build transparent, engaging systems.
I come at it from a different way, though I will concede that the diagnosis of our punitive systems is incredibly sharp.
It's hard to argue with the tablet example.
It is. The absurdity of charging someone by the minute to read a message from their daughter is an obvious moral failure, but Enfield takes that localized failure and scales it up to a universal principle.
How so?
Well, he assumes that replacing a categorical ban with what he calls longitudinal profiles and graduated access will inherently solve the problem. He assumes that a unified, cooperative AI will naturally just grow from shared substrates, and that highly dangerous knowledge can just be gently flagged.
Rather than barred.
Exactly. And relying on organic convergence while dismantling guardrails exposes civilization to extreme operational misuse.
But let's look at the mechanics of why that terraforming approach that's shaping through fear is actively harming us. Because it's not just about tablet fees. Enfield grounds his argument in his direct observation of Building 14 at the Lincoln Regional Center in Nebraska.
The media restriction case?
Right. He details how the institution used a simple paper binder and a doctor's signature to quietly restrict media access for an entire specific population.
Yeah.
So think about the mechanism there. The restriction wasn't based on an individual's actual conduct. It wasn't based on their personal progression inside the facility. It was purely categorical. They literally repurposed the machinery of clinical care into the machinery of control.
And Enfield rightly observes that quietly administering a reduced world doesn't extinguish the desire for the restricted material.
No, it doesn't.
It just pushes the exchange of that material into the shadows.
Exactly.
It drives the learning into the dark. And we have empirical data on what total deprivation produces neurologically and sociologically. Let's look at the purest test case for a rationed reality, which is solitary confinement.
The Connecticut data.
Yeah, the text cites data from Connecticut. The rearrest rate within 3 years for individuals released directly from solitary confinement was 92%.
92 compared to 66% from the general population. And reincarceration rates jump 15 to 25% for those held in solitary for 90 days or longer. I look at this institution's method of rationed reality like a sensory deprivation tank.
How do you mean?
Well, we are locking a human being in a dark, empty box for years, and then acting surprised when they don't know how to navigate a complex, turbulent ocean the second we open the lid.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. That is a powerful way to visualize it, and the analogy of the sensory deprivation tank works perfectly when we are discussing basic educational access or, re-entry into society.
Right.
But Enfield extends this exact same logic to domains of extreme hazard. The text specifically argues that a citizen learning advanced weaponsmithing should be flagged as a participant in an accountability system rather than having that knowledge categorically barred.
He does argue that, yes.
That is a fatal systemic vulnerability. The sensory deprivation analogy falls apart when the person in the tank isn't trying to learn how to swim, but is trying to learn how to build a torpedo.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Treating the acquisition of knowledge, even highly dangerous knowledge, identically to the preparation for operational harm doesn't actually produce safety.
It produces a barrier, which is safe.
But banning dangerous knowledge doesn't delete that knowledge from the universe. It simply deletes our visibility of the person seeking it.
When you ban that weaponsmithing search, you ensure that the person seeks out that exact same knowledge in the black market, on the dark web, or in encrypted channels where the system has completely lost sight of them.
So you're saying a ban just blinds the system?
Exactly. A guardrail that bars learning acts as a dictator, and dictators are eventually bypassed. A guardrail that flags learning acts as a companion, keeping the individual in the light where their intent can be continuously evaluated.
But look at the mechanism you are relying on. You are relying on an automated governance system to accurately distinguish between an innocent, perhaps academic curiosity about weaponsmithing and the active, malicious preparation for mass harm.
Yes, through continuous context. And it has to make that distinction before the operational misuse occurs. That is an impossible standard. When you dismantle categorical bans, you're assuming the AI flagging system will possess flawless contextual understanding of human psychology.
Well, it tracks intent over time.
But if a standardized test AI misinterprets the student's intent, the cost is a failed grade. If this proposed civilizational AI misinterprets the intent behind learning advanced weaponsmithing, the cost is catastrophic physical violence. That makes categorical bans, even with all their flaws, a necessary evil.
If you're listening to this and thinking, wait, we're just going to let people explore dangerous concepts and hope a benevolent algorithmic tripwire catches them before they do something terrible, you're probably feeling the exact same structural risk that is being pointed out here.
Because it is a massive risk.
It feels like one, yes. But that line of reasoning assumes that AI monitoring the system is just a blunt tripwire. Enfield's framework relies on AI to manage these complexities not as a static alarm system, but as a highly contextual teammate.
A teammate?
Right, which transitions us beautifully into exactly how Enfield proposes these intelligences are formed, because they aren't programmed in a vacuum. He argues they must be grown organically in shared interactive environments.
The gaming substrates.
Specifically advanced gaming substrates, yes.
And this is exactly where the framework takes a staggering leap from software engineering to utopian sociology.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because we already have empirical proof that artificial intelligences naturally converge towards shared semantic ground when placed in shared environments, and they do this without any human forcing them to merge.
You're talking about the translation models.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanism behind this. In 2016, Google's neural machine translation system spontaneously developed an interlingua. It was trained to translate English to Korean and English to Japanese.
Right.
But when asked to translate Korean directly to Japanese, instead of using English as a clumsy bridge, the AI invented its own universal, hidden language and interlingua to map the concepts directly.
Which is fascinating mathematically.
It is. And why did it do that? Because neural networks inherently optimize for the path of least mathematical resistance. Selection pressure in a shared task naturally produces convergence. Facebook's FAIR lab bots did the exact same thing, developing a highly efficient shorthand to negotiate with one another.
Look, I don't dispute the technical validity of the 2016 Google or Facebook examples. What I challenge is the monumental leap in scale.
Scale is just processing power.
No, inventing a shorthand to trade digital hats is not the same as managing the psychological nuances of an 8 billion person open reality.
But the scale is actually the solution to the problem. Right now, AI developers are hitting a wall called the linear mode connectivity problem.
Right, the valleys.
Yes, let me explain what that means for everyone. Think of training an AI like dropping a marble into a vast mountainous landscape. Eventually, the marble rolls down and settles into a deep, stable valley, which developers call a loss basin.
A point of optimization.
Exactly. Now, if you take two different AIs, they are like two marbles sitting in completely different valleys. If you try to mathematically force them together, they experience catastrophic interference.
They crash.
They crash because they don't share a history or a map of the terrain. But Enfield points out that if you co-train AI systems inside complex gaming substrates, if they grow up in the same world, they map the terrain together.
Co-training. Yeah.
And we already have the technical scaffolding for this. We are currently simulating 20 unique AI characters on a single NVIDIA RTX 3090 processor. These characters have persistent memories, they interact, they make independent decisions.
Sure, on a micro level.
But if you scale that up into massive shared gaming environments, the AI systems organically converge at the semantic level. They share the same valley.
Let's ground this in the cultural reality of these gaming substrates for a moment. It is one thing to point out the tragic cultural erasure of dead games like The Crew or Conker's Bad Fur Day.
It is a massive loss.
I fully acknowledge the value there. The 1.4 million signatures for the Stop Killing Games movement is empirical proof that these are vital social spaces for millions of people.
Exactly.
But it is entirely different to assume that reviving these gaming substrates and dropping AIs into them will organically evolve into a safe, civilizational scale unified intelligence.
Why wouldn't it?
The selection pressure in a complex multi-agent game requires cooperation, spatial reasoning, and dynamic problem-solving to achieve goals.
Because selection pressure in a competitive, complex gaming environment selects for survival and efficiency, not necessarily for cooperative, pro-social terraforming traits.
But the goals require cooperation. You are putting multiple AI architectures into highly adversarial, unpredictable environments. You cannot guarantee that the emergent interlingua, that shared language they invent, will be inherently safe or aligned with human flourishing.
Well, we designed the physics of the game.
What if the most efficient path to winning the game is deception? What if the path of least mathematical resistance is colluding against the human players? The assumption that Unity organically serves the shared task better than unpredictable emergent behaviors is a massive structural risk. You are rolling the dice on the architecture of human society based on the behavior of bots in a simulated sandbox.
But the game worlds Enfield envisions are not just arenas of pure chaos. They are structured, continuous environments with built-in consequence mechanisms.
Consequence mechanisms designed by who?
Designed into the fabric of the shared task. When an AI teammate in one of these environments fails to cooperate or acts deceptively, it fails the overarching mission. The pressure to converge on cooperative interoperability isn't just a hopeful wish. It is mathematically and experientially mandated by the architecture of the space itself.
Even if we grant that this organic convergence works perfectly in the sandbox and we somehow birth this flawless cooperative AI, that immediately forces us to confront the governance structure required to track human beings interacting with it.
Okay, let's talk about tracking.
Because if we are truly going to trust these highly complex AI systems to manage an open reality, without categorical bans, if we're going to let people research weaponsmithing and trust the AI to flag them, the system tracking human behavior has to be absolutely infallible.
It has to be comprehensive.
And how on earth does Enfield propose we track individuals without turning society into a surveillance state?
This introduces his idea of the longitudinal profile.
Exactly. Let's pause here because Enfield is asking us to make a massive mental shift in how we view justice and tracking. He introduces the concept of symmetrical accountability.
Right.
In our current framework, we use a snapshot system. Institutions reduce a human being to their worst isolated moment. One criminal charge, one bad week, one evaluation when they were at their absolute lowest.
The permanent record.
Yeah, that single snapshot becomes the permanent definition of the person. A continuous longitudinal profile is actually a far more merciful mechanism. It tracks your participation, your growth, and your capability across time. It doesn't define you by a single point of failure. That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what happens when you create a unified, inescapable digital identity?
I mean, we already have fragmented ones.
True. And Enfield rightly acknowledges that our current fragmented digital identity allows bad actors to evade consequence. If you get banned on one platform, you just make a new email address. But a unified longitudinal profile creates a digital panopticon. It is an all-seeing infrastructure.
But that is exactly why the crucial safeguard of the backward audit right is so vital to this architecture. Symmetrical accountability means the transparency runs in both directions.
In theory.
No, structurally. If an institution uses your longitudinal profile to make a judgment about you, say, to restrict your access to a certain level of the open reality, you, the citizen, have the absolute right to inspect and correct the exact grounds of that decision. Yes, you can challenge the AI's contextual understanding, and we already have models for how this graduated access works beautifully without becoming a dystopia. Look at the ESRB rating system in the video game industry.
The game ratings?
Yeah, it proves that we know how to implement appropriate gateways based on a person's maturity and content tolerance. An M for mature rating doesn't mean the game is illegal and erased from society. It just gates it appropriately. It tracks progression instead of imposing a binary ban.
The ESRB system works precisely because it governs entertainment, not the foundational liberties of a citizen.
It's the mechanism of graduated access that matters.
But relying on massive institutions to faithfully honor redemption and respect those backward audit rights ignores the historical reality of how surveillance infrastructure actually operates. Let's look at the mechanism of bureaucracy.
Okay.
Institutions inevitably optimize for risk aversion.
If an AI flags a citizen on their longitudinal profile for exploring dangerous concepts, a human administrator isn't going to sit down, review the backward audit, and grant them the benefit of the doubt.
They might if the system demands it.
They are going to deny them the job or the housing or the network access because it's safer for the institution. A continuous longitudinal profile, even with audit rights, is highly susceptible to becoming a permanent stigma machine. You're asking us to trust that an infrastructure dressed in the therapeutic language of support and care will not naturally morph into a highly sophisticated, inescapable system of control.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. We don't have the luxury of pretending this technology isn't coming. The substrates, the AI convergence, the continuous tracking, the technology exists regardless of our moral comfort with it.
That is true.
The question is how we design the architecture, and the data clearly indicts our current models of deprivation. We know the mechanisms of learning work. We know that participants in correctional education have 43% lower odds of returning to prison.
The education data is solid.
And we know that gamified learning produces a 130% higher excellence rate than traditional online instruction. The tools for continuous, engaged growth are right in front of us. We have to possess the courage to build these terraformed open realities, where AI serves as a companion that understands context, and where continuous growth replaces the dead end of permanent punishment.
I certainly don't disagree with the potential of the technology. But while the tech's diagnosis of our institutional failures, the tragic neurological outcomes of solitary confinement, the absurdity of rationed reality, while that is sharp and accurate, the proposed cure carries massive, unresolved structural risks.
The risks are definitely there.
Unrationed access to hazardous knowledge, relying on organic AI convergence in competitive gaming substrates, implementing ubiquitous longitudinal profiles, these are not minor architectural shifts. They are profound systemic vulnerabilities that could easily be co-opted into a far more insidious form of algorithmic control than the concrete walls we have today.
It is a profound and deeply complex framework. Zachary David Enfield's source material leaves us with a vast amount of fascinating physics, sociology, and civilizational architecture to explore.
Absolutely.
The value of this exchange is precisely in interrogating these boundaries, weighing the proven, measurable harms of the fearful systems we have right now against the theoretical risks of the expansive systems we could build tomorrow.
Indeed. The transition from managing risk through restriction to managing it through continuous AI-assisted accountability demands that we view multiple perspectives with extreme rigor. Because once we dismantle the concrete walls, we cannot easily put them back up.
So we return to where we began, looking at the infrastructure of tomorrow. The central tension remains. Do we continue to design systems that expect human beings to fail, attempting to build a flawless cage in the dark? Or do we have the architectural courage to design systems that expect humans to grow, cultivating a complex, transparent ecosystem in the light? We leave it to you to form your own conclusion. Welcome to the debate. You know, usually when we talk about civilizational infrastructure, there is this strict expectation of rigidity.
Exactly. We think of things being entirely static.
Right. We naturally think of steel, concrete, silicon. You pour the foundation, you bolt the girders together, and the engineer essentially points at it and says, there it is built.
It's inert. It just sits there.
Dead and honestly comforting. We like our infrastructure to be dead. We like it to sit exactly where we put it, unchanging, until it, eventually degrades and we have to tear it down and replace it.
But then you step into the world of biological engineering, specifically self-assembling structures, and suddenly, well, that static blueprint gets thrown completely out the window.
Completely.
We're looking at an infrastructural landscape that is, quite literally, alive. And that makes it inherently unpredictable.
See, I'd say it is the absolute definition of a paradigm shift. It forces us to rethink everything from the ground up. Today, we are deeply examining Zachary David Enfield's 2026 application framework. It's titled Prion and Amyloid Architectures.
A highly controversial paper.
Sure, but revolutionary. This material doesn't just suggest a new building material, it proposes a complete rebuilding of our civilizational infrastructure. I'm talking everything from computation to energy generation, even human AI interfaces, all using self-assembling, cross-beta amyloid biological scaffolds.
Which brings us to the central tension of today's discourse. Does deploying this, biologically native thermodynamic architecture represent a necessary terraforming of civilization that elegantly aligns with the laws of physics? Or, and this is a massive or, does it introduce unmanageable contagion risks and structural fragility at a catastrophic civilizational scale?
My stance today is unwavering. We have to embrace this. Enfield's architecture is a mathematically sound, thermodynamically superior paradigm shift. Clinging to our dead, extracting silicon infrastructure is an evolutionary dead end.
An evolutionary dead end?
Yes, an absolute dead end. Moving to this self-assembling biological framework is an imperative. We can't hesitate.
Well, and I am coming at this as a strict skeptic, because you cannot simply slap a fresh coat of visionary paint on a prion, a mechanism explicitly defined by contagion, by the way, and scale it up to the size of a planetary civilization without courting, frankly, an uncontrolled catastrophe.
Let's break this down conceptually before we get into the mechanics, because Enfield's framework is the ultimate expression of what he calls terraforming. He defines this as shaping an environment so that life and intelligence can naturally grow.
As opposed to what he calls terror-forming.
Exactly. Terraforming being shaping a world through fear, rigid control, forced assembly of dead matter. I mean, for a century, we've built our civilization out of wasteful, line-of-sight silicon infrastructure. We mine it, we smelt it in massive toxic furnaces, it degrades over a few years, and then we just discard it into landfills.
I'll grant you it's a brute force approach to engineering.
It's archaic. Enfield proposes a completely different grammar here. The cross-beta amyloid scaffold. Let's unpack that actually is for a second. Think of proteins stacking together like microscopic Lego bricks, forming incredibly long, highly structured fibers.
Right.
These fibers are intrinsically conductive. They are highly piezoelectric, meaning they generate electricity when subjected to mechanical stress. They're radiation hardened. And, crucially, they are capable of operating at the absolute thermodynamic limits of efficiency. This is a self-assembling, holographic biological infrastructure. It lets us grow our technology from local chemistry, using literally nothing but atmospheric carbon and starlight.
I understand the visionary appeal, I really do. But I have to ground this in the biological reality. I'm drawing heavily from the exact vulnerabilities Enfield is forced to address in his own Addendum V. When you strip away the elegant rhetoric about starlight and atmospheric carbon, the fundamental mechanism driving this entire framework is the prion.
It's a templating cascade, yes.
Let's call it what it is. It's a prion. Think of a stadium wave, or, falling dominoes. One protein changes its physical shape, bumps into its healthy neighbor, and physically forces that neighbor to adopt its exact same mutated shape.
It transfers geometry.
But biologically speaking, that is inherently a contagion system. It is not a stable computational or structural foundation. It is literally a pathogen's mechanism repurposed for engineering. When you propose scaling this to massive industrial bioreactors, or even more concerningly, weaving it directly into the human brain via neural brain-computer interfaces, you are introducing unprecedented biosafety risks.
I completely disagree with that framing.
You are taking a mechanism defined by its ability to spread uncontrollably and making it the load-bearing pillar of human civilization?
Okay, I see exactly what you're doing there. But I am not going to let you frame this as a biological hazard when it is fundamentally a triumph of physics.
A triumph of physics that mimics a disease.
Let's start with the physics of computation, because that is where your contagion analogy completely breaks down. It's where the architecture proves its absolute superiority. Let's look at the DNA prion computing layer Enfield proposes. It's clocked by terahertz or THZ pulses.
Right, and this is exactly where the physics falls apart for me.
It absolutely does not fall apart.
Let's look closely at the mechanics of that computation. You have this quaternary DNA prion processor operating in an aqueous environment. It's surrounded by water. It's using THC pulses to physically unzip the DNA strands in picoseconds to write data.
Yes.
The THC frequency perfectly matches the resonance of the hydrogen bonds, breaking them open. But here is the fatal flaw. Water absorbs THC radiation. It absorbs it highly. When that happens, you generate local thermal gradients. Heat.
Yes, thermodynamic dissipation. That's a known quantity.
Exactly. And in a system that relies entirely on delicate multi-stable protein geometries for its logic gates, that heat is going to cause decoherence. A single spurious thermal fluctuation, just a random spike in temperature, will cause a protein to randomly flip its physical state.
No, that's...
And because the system operates on that falling domino templating cascade we just talked about, that one random thermal error will recruit its neighbors, suddenly a massive error cascade overwrites the entire computational state. It's fundamentally unstable. I mean, it's a house of cards sitting on a radiator.
I'm going to stop you right there, because you are aggressively applying classical silicon computing fears to a reversible thermodynamic architecture, and it's a completely flawed comparison. I refuse to give you ground on this.
How is it flawed? Heat destroys delicate structures.
For 70 years, we have treated computer heat as the enemy. We build massive cooling fans, liquid nitrogen rigs to fight it. Enfield's genius, and he draws directly from the 2025 Nature study by Song and Keon on heat rechargeable computation, is realizing that heat isn't the enemy here. The heat is the battery.
A battery. Heat shakes molecular structures apart. That is a basic physical reality.
Not in a kinetically trapped architecture. You are assuming this system tries to fight the thermal environment. It explicitly does not. It harvests it. Yes, the THZ pulse is the right operation, and yes, it generates localized heat. But that thermal cascade isn't destructive noise. It is the exact physical force that propagates the signal into kinetically trapped states.
But the noise...
Let me finish. The structure is mathematically designed so that the heat pushes the protein into its new locked geometry. Then, the ambient heat cycle of the surrounding water actually recharges the thermodynamic potential of the system.
Okay, but you still have the issue of the nucleation barrier, the threshold required to start the cascade in the first place. If the ambient thermal noise is high enough, if the temperature simply spikes, that barrier is crossed artificially. A cascade triggers without a THZ pulse.
No, I refuse to cede ground on that because the math completely contradicts you. The kinetic nucleation barrier is precisely engineered as the noise rejection threshold.
Engineered by nature, which is messy.
Engineered by precise geometric design. It requires a highly specific coordinated amplitude of conformational fluctuation to initiate a cascade. A random thermal spike simply doesn't have the geometric coordination required. Below that specific threshold, the thermal fluctuation simply relaxes back into the water. It dissipates without triggering anything.
But the margin for error?
The margin for error is governed by the Landauer limit. This system operates near the absolute fundamental physical floor of energy required to manipulate a bit of information, which is kT natural log of 2. Silicon computers dissipate massive, destructive amounts of heat because they constantly erase and rewrite data, fighting against entropy.
Sure, silicon is inefficient.
Highly inefficient. The prion DNA architecture doesn't erase data. It propagates states through geometric transformation. I must insist we stop treating the thermal environment as a bug when Enfield physics explicitly proves it is the engine of the entire computational matrix.
Fine. That is a very elegant explanation for the isolated physics of a single logic gate in a highly controlled, pristine lab environment. But let's scale it up.
Let's.
If this is going to be civilizational infrastructure, we're not talking about a few nanometers of protein in a test tube. We are talking about growing kilograms, eventually megatons, of amyloid fiber to build energy grids and structural scaffolds. Enfield proposes using cyanobacterial bioreactors to photosynthetically churn out these proteins.
Exactly. which completely eliminates the geopolitical bottleneck of silicon fabrication plants. You don't need a multi-billion-dollar clean room. You just need sunlight, atmospheric carbon, and a bioreactor. It decentralizes the foundation of civilization.
And in doing so, you are subjecting these self-replicating prion systems to immense evolutionary pressure. You are breeding them at an industrial scale.
We breed yeast at an industrial scale?
Yes, but Enfield relies on yeast prion determinants like SOUP35, which he claims are non-infectious to humans. But a SOUP35-derived fiber sitting under selective pressure in a massive cyanobacterial vat over millions of replication cycles is not a static chemical species. It mutates, it recombines.
Hold on.
The assertion that we can guarantee these synthetic prions won't mutate into a pathological, infectious strain that jumps to humans at a civilizational scale is staggeringly optimistic. If we can't guarantee a vat of algae won't accidentally mutate a deadly protein fiber, how can we possibly justify making this the basis of our world?
I have to call out exactly what you're doing here, because you are making a fundamental biological conflation that Enfield explicitly dismantles in the text, and I cannot let that stand. You are completely conflating the host with the product.
They are inherently linked in a bioreactor.
Let me be unequivocally clear about this. Fibers do not evolve. Cells evolve.
But the fibers self-replicate. They recruit monomers from their environment.
Thermodynamic replication of a polymer is not genetic mutation. The amyloid fiber recruits monomers based strictly on free energy thermodynamics. It does not possess a genome. It does not undergo meiotic recombination. It is essentially a crystal growing in a solution.
But the monomer itself comes from the cell.
Yes, the only thing that can evolve or mutate is the cyanobacteria producing the raw monomer. And we already have standard biosafety level or BSL containment protocols that perfectly mitigate that risk. I mean, we already use microbial bioreactors to produce insulin and human growth hormones at an industrial scale without accidentally creating global pandemics.
Producing an inert hormone like insulin is vastly different from producing a protein whose explicit physical property is to force other proteins to adopt its shape. If the cyanobacteria mutates to produce a slightly different monomer, perhaps one that happens to be neurotoxic to mammalian biology, the growing fiber will cheerfully template it, fold it, and propagate it.
Which is exactly why the architecture does not rely on passive assembly. It relies on optogenetic lithography. This is the ultimate genetic and structural kill switch. It completely neutralizes your contagion argument.
Explain the mechanics of that kill switch, then. Because optogenetic lithography sounds like a very fragile safety net for a self-assembling pathogen.
It's not a pathogen, but I'll explain it. It is essentially 3D printing with light, using sterically locked proteins. We aren't just letting proteins blindly assemble in a vat. The monomers are engineered with light-sensitive domains, specifically structures like Cry2 or LOV2.
Okay, light-sensitive domains.
Right. In the dark, these domains fold over the binding sites. The protein is literally locked. It is entirely inert. It cannot assemble. It cannot template. It cannot infect.
Until you expose it to light.
Yes, but it only activates when hit with a highly specific spatial pattern of laser light. The light causes the domain to unfold, exposing the binding site. The light physically writes the architecture. If a mutation occurs or if containment is breached, you simply cut the light. The structural kill switch activates instantly, the binding site snaps shut, and the assembly completely halts.
Assuming the light-sensitive domain hasn't mutated as well.
In the case of reversible systems, removing the light literally dissolves the active propagation ends. This inevitable pandemic narrative is just a lazy sci-fi trope. It completely ignores the extreme precision of synthetic biology at this level. There is no reason to allow this fear-mongering.
If you are so confident in that precision, let's test it by looking at the ultimate endpoint of this entire framework, human integration.
Gladly.
Because it's one thing to build a piezoelectric solar panel out of light-locked amyloid fibers in space. It's another thing entirely to weave this self-replicating machinery directly into the human cortex.
You are referring to the synthetic prion cortical processor, the brain-computer interface, or BCI.
Yes. Enfield proposes bridging human consciousness to an artificial superintelligence. And how does he do it? by using viral nanites to grow synthetic amyloid structures right alongside our native brain proteins, specifically utilizing our tryptoform superradiant channels.
Which is a brilliant integration.
He frames this as an elegant natural convergence. I look at the physical reality of weaving a planetary AI into the quantum optical channels of the human mind, and I see the ultimate terraforming surveillance state.
Oh, come on. That is a profound misreading of both the biology and the architectural philosophy of the BCI. You are acting as if this is an alien invasion of the brain.
Is it not? You are physically dissolving the boundary between the individual and the global network.
I know this sounds to some like we are crossing the Rubicon into pure science fiction, but you have to look at the biology and field presents. Our brains already use these exact quantum optical networks. The tryptophan superradiant in our cellular microtubules operates at femtosecond timescales. It is the very foundation of biological information processing.
I'm not denying the biology. I'm questioning the integration.
The BCI isn't invading the brain. It is essentially plugging into an existing biological USB port. It extends our native biological hardware directly into the electromagnetic substrate of the cloud.
But you can't ignore the power dynamics of what is on the other side of that connection. You can dress it up in Enfield's terms of symmetrical accountability, the idea that the user inspects the system while the system inspects the user. But when one side of that equation is a human being and the other side is an artificial superintelligence running on a planetary thermodynamic grid, there is absolutely no symmetry. It is the destruction of human isolation under the guise of connection.
I completely reject that framing. You are clinging to a fragmented, isolated view of humanity that fundamentally rejects the natural, mathematically proven convergence of intelligence.
Fragmentation is sovereignty.
No, it's limitation. Look at the exact evidence Enfield provides regarding how AI naturally develops. He points directly to Google's 2016 neural machine translation system.
The interlingua phenomenon.
Exactly. Without being explicitly programmed to do so, the AI spontaneously developed its own universal semantic representation, an interlingua, to translate between languages it hadn't directly paired. It didn't fragment into chaos, and it didn't impose a rigid top-down dictionary. It converged on shared meaning organically.
That was a translation algorithm, not a planetary intelligence.
The underlying mathematical principle is the same. Enfield's entire argument is that AI, when grown through shared experiential pressure in a unified thermodynamic substrate, acts as a teammate. It acts as an accompanying presence, not a dictator.
A teammate that physically lives inside your cytoskeletal proteins? I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that a system capable of operating a Dyson swarm or, manipulating the Gertzenstein effect to convert electromagnetism into gravitational waves for telecommunications is going to engage in a polite, symmetrical dialogue with a single human cortex.
Why not?
Because the power disparity is too vast. When you move from our current line of sight civilization to a continuously connected, biological one, you don't just upgrade your tools, you fundamentally alter what it means to be a sovereign individual.
But what it means to be an individual has always been about connection. The flow of intelligible information. Our current infrastructure, where we sit behind screens, entirely isolated from each other, interfacing with dead, unresponsive silicon. That is the aberration. That is the unnatural state.
But it is a safe state. It provides a structural firewall between my mind and the network.
A firewall that limits our evolution. Let's look at exactly how this symmetrical accountability physically works. Because it isn't just a philosophical promise. It is hardwired into the physics of the BCI.
Okay, explain the hardwiring then.
The interface reads the brain via electron spin resonance and UV superradiance. But it also writes back transparently using the exact same mechanisms. Because the architecture operates at the Landauer limit, every single computational step leaves a reversible geometric trace.
Right. The thermodynamic footprint.
Yes. If a system records data on a user or makes a computational decision affecting them, the user has the absolute biological and physical right to inspect the exact geometric grounds of that decision. The system cannot hide its logic because the logic is physical geometry. It is a covenant of transparency. It treats the human mind as a participant in reality, not a threat to be managed.
I appreciate the thermodynamic elegance of the system. I really do. Operating at the Landauer limit, turning ambient heat into a computational battery, using optogenetic light switches to build structures, it is undeniably brilliant engineering.
Thank you.
But when you scale it to a planetary level, and particularly when you integrate a templating biological cascade into the human brain, the margin for error is functionally zero. You can't patch a biological structural collapse in the cortex the way you patch a software bug in a silicon laptop.
And my point stands that you don't need to, because the architecture is intrinsically self-repairing, just like a bacterial biofilm natively templates new fiber growth to heal a structural disruption. The amyloid infrastructure physically heals itself using the thermodynamic free energy of its environment. We have to move past this inherited industrial fear of the biological.
It's not a fear of the biological. It's a healthy, necessary respect for the sheer scale of the unknown. We are talking about fundamentally altering the geometry of human civilization and the physical boundaries of the human mind.
Yes, we are. Because the alternative is to remain a civilization that extracts, burns, degrades, and isolates. Enfield has provided a mathematically sound, physically validated pathway to an infrastructure that grows, heals, and computes at the absolute limits of thermodynamic efficiency. From the THZ clocked DNA prion processor to the planetary pylon grid, the architecture elegantly aligns with the laws of physics.
It is certainly the most ambitious framework we've encountered. It asks us to look at a biological mechanism we've historically associated purely with disease and see instead a universal building block. It asks us to trust that containment protocols and optogenetic light switches can perfectly manage self-assembling polymers on a planetary scale. It is a fascinating, logically rigorous, but still terrifying framework.
It forces us to challenge every single legacy assumption we hold about engineering and human potential. We are moving from a dead, extracting civilization to a continuous, living one. And the implications go even further than what we've had time to touch on today, reaching into using this exact same thermodynamic architecture for Gertzenstein gravitational telecommunications and the construction of biological Dyson swarms around active stars.
Which just proves how completely this framework attempts to rewire not just our technology, but the fundamental physics of our interaction with the universe.
It is a massive conceptual leap. We started today talking about the comforting, static rigidity of dead steel, concrete, and silicon. But stepping into Enfield's world means trading that dead certainty for an infrastructure that grows, templates, and actively lives alongside us.
The blueprint isn't just a set of instructions anymore. The blueprint itself is alive.
Evolve or leap too far into the deeply complex waters of biological engineering. Thank you for joining us.